Excellency, Ambassador Daniel Taub, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, ladies and gentlemen, Chag Sameach. After 2,000 years of longing, we have a Jewish state in the land of Israel. And we, who are privileged to be alive at this time, have the chance to build a future for the people of Israel and to inspire a new generation to strengthen their Jewish identity with Israel at its core. This is the work of the UJIA. Last night, I was privileged to take part in a Yom HaZikaron, a Memorial Day service and Yom HaZikaron party in Mill Hill Synagogue. The 250 of us were inspired by the 6 Magic Moments teenagers who joined us from Shlomi, the northern Israel town supported by UJIA. Magic Moments is a program run by the UJIA to provide one of many ways to create a connection between Israel and the diaspora. Thank you, UJIA. Thank you also to everyone who has joined us this morning to celebrate 66 years of celebration of the growth and inspiration that Israel continually provides to us. And it's my pleasure this morning to acknowledge the support of Deutsche Bank and to introduce you to the CEO of UK Operations, Colin Grassi. Colin has been CEO of the UK Operations since 2009. Ladies and gentlemen, Colin.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your remarks this morning. Very sharp and a great way to start the week. Bill, for yours, very inspirational. Ladies and gentlemen, Deutsche Bank clients, and if any of you are not, please see me afterwards. My Deutsche Bank colleagues, everybody, a very good morning and Boker Tov to you all. It is my privilege, on behalf of Deutsche Bank, I sit on the group board, to tell you just how proud we are to be associated with the UJIA. I had two pages of remarks on that subject, but then I heard Bill speak this morning, and I saw the video, and I must say, I can't do better than you did, Bill, he did. But may I pick up on one or two things? I thought the video was spectacular. The young man that we got to see, it's very real. It breathes to life, these projects and the efforts and where the money goes, why we support. It breathes life into the proposition. Secondly, the statistics around the boys and girls, the young people, roughly half living at the margin is just devastating. Some of you, many of you will have children, even young children. We still do. And that hurts. It is devastating. So again, it breathes sadly to life the purpose of what we're doing and why we're committed. One of the other hats I wear at Deutsche Bank is I chair diversity globally. And colleagues here, such as Bruce, that I've worked with for years, and others support me. And therefore, the comments that were made with respect to the potential for young women and for women in the community really resonated with me. And that's something I really will take away and think a little bit about and see if in the context of our support and partnership with the UJIA, we can do more, particularly around women and young people. My close colleague, Elad, whom some of you will know, is in Israel today celebrating, and I think that's a very good reason not to be here today, and we wish he and his family well. Just a word on what Deutsche Bank does commercially. Many of you will not know, nor should you necessarily know, we have led or been a senior participant in every financing the State of Israel has done in recent memory. We're very proud of that fact. We're a significant player in the local market, as some of you will know, from debt to equity to currency, but a real sweet spot, in my opinion, of how we serve some of you in this room and others around the world is that sweet spot of commercial real estate, which sits so importantly in our private bank and so importantly in our investment bank, both. And we work with some of you and important Jewish community organizations commercially in every part of the world on small, medium, and large projects, and we're very excited about that. My real job this morning, ladies and gentlemen, aside from emphasizing how important is this sponsorship and partnership, this is the 5th year, and we look forward to many years in the future. In addition to that, my key brief this morning is to introduce Sir Malcolm Rifkind, coincidentally a fellow Scot. And I'm reminded of the remarks made in a location not a million miles from here last Monday night when the Prime Minister, after being introduced, said, "After such a glowing introduction, I'm looking forward to hearing myself speak." So I will attempt to do some justice to Sir Malcolm this morning. As I said, a fellow Scot. He was born in Edinburgh, educated at George Watson's and Edinburgh University. He studied law, and he took a postgraduate degree in political science. He was on University Challenge, so he's certainly very sharp. He has lived in southern Rhodesia, now called Zimbabwe, in the late 60s, where he met Edith, his wife, who had left to go there with her family. When he came back to Britain, he was called to the bar, and he practiced as an advocate until 1979. He was appointed a Queen's Counsel in 1985, and he served and profiled in some very significant civil and criminal cases, which some of you may remember, and I hope didn't feature in. But if you are here, I hope your stay was comfortable, and you are most welcome this morning. In 1970, he fought his first parliamentary campaign, and from 1970 to 1974, he was a local councillor in Edinburgh. In 1974, he was elected an MP for the Pentlands and represented that constituency until 1997. He went to the front bench in 1975. There was an issue around devolution. He resigned in 1977. In 1979, when the Conservatives were returned to power under Margaret Thatcher, he was appointed a parliamentary secretary, Under-Secretary of State, at first in the Scottish office, and then at the time of the Falklands War, he was transferred to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, being promoted to Minister of State in 1983. He became a member of the Cabinet in 1985, as Secretary of the State for Scotland. In 1990, he became Secretary of State for Transport, and in 1992, Secretary of State for Defence. From 95 to 97, he was Foreign Secretary, one of the only 4 ministers to serve throughout the whole prime ministerships of both Margaret Thatcher and John Major. In 1997, he was knighted in recognition of his public service. He has done many, many things beyond this in community and voluntary, and many of you will know that in recent years has served as the Member of Parliament for Kensington and Chelsea, and most recently and continuing for Kensington. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege and a pleasure to welcome a great geo-macro commentator, and his views on the Middle East and other current events are of great significance to us. Thank you all for coming, and Sir Malcolm, it's a privilege.
Colin, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Colin, for that marvelous introduction. President Lyndon Johnson of the United States once said, in similar circumstances, "Thank you, that is the sort of introduction which my father would have enjoyed and my mother would have believed." Can I say also, of course, I'm here as your speaker, and I am, as has been mentioned, the Member of Parliament for Kensington, so I must offer a particular welcome to probably half of you who are my constituents. It's a very unusual place, as you all know, Kensington. On one occasion, one of my colleagues said that on a Thursday night or a Friday, every other Member of Parliament leaves London and goes to his second home in the country. In Malcolm Rifkin's case, all his constituents leave London and go to their second homes in the country. A slight exaggeration, but nevertheless something in it. When I was Foreign Secretary, I had to make many, many speeches. When you're no longer a minister, it's slightly different. You know when you've retired, it's when you climb into the back of your car and it doesn't go anywhere. This, nevertheless, is a fate which we all have to anticipate. My congratulations to the UJIA. They are a marvelous organization that have been doing enormous amounts of good for very many, many years. and you have every reason to assume that that will continue in the years to come. I want to just mention, if I may, my own sort of personal background with regard to Israel and the Middle East. It goes back quite a long way. My first visit to the Holy Land was actually as an 18 or 19-year-old student in 1965. And I went to Jerusalem. But of course, it was 1965. I didn't go to Israel. I was on an overland expedition to India, 200 British students traveling by bus, and we went through Turkey and Syria, through Damascus, down to Amman, before going across to Baghdad and on to India. And while we were in Jordan, I spent a day with a colleague, and we went to East Jerusalem, as it then was. And I was walking with this colleague around the old city, a few hundred yards from Israel, but having never been to Israel as a child. And a young Arab boy came up to me, or came up to us, and he said in sort of broken English, he could see we were tourists, can I take you anywhere? Can I show you anywhere? So I thought, well, what an obvious opportunity, because I had no map of the old city. I said, do you know where the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall is? The temple. He said, yes, of course, I will take you there. And we spent several minutes going around various back streets, not knowing, in fact, whether he would take us to the right place or not. And eventually we emerged into what was then a very small square, nothing remotely like the Western Wall today. And there was nobody there, not a soul there, absolutely deserted. Square probably twice the size of this room. Nobody there. But it was obvious it was the Western Wall because of the huge stones and so forth. And as you all know, there are these niches where people traditionally put their forehead and may say a few words of prayer. And the colleague I was with was non-Jewish, and he had a camera, and he said, Malcolm, why don't you go and stand by the wall as if you were, praying and whatever, and I'll take a photograph. And he was just about to take a photograph when the young Arab boy with us, must have been 12-year-old, he said, no, you mustn't do that. I said, why not? And he said, well, because he didn't know I was Jewish. He said, only Jewish people are supposed to do what your friend is doing. And if you take a photograph and show that to your friends back home, they might be upset. I thought, it's extraordinary. A 12-year-old Arab boy worried about people and Jews in Britain being upset. I now want to switch forward 20, 30 years. I've been to Israel several times, but in the 1990s, when I was Defense Secretary, I'd given the annual Balfour lecture in Israel, and the host, when you give that lecture, is your fellow defense minister, which happened at the time to be Yitzhak Rabin. He was the prime minister, but he was also defense minister. The next time I was in Jerusalem was for his funeral. And I remember being, before the formal ceremony, being in a marquee for VIPs, and I was speaking to a former Israeli ambassador to London, and as he was speaking, suddenly the tears appeared on his face, and I said, what's wrong? He said, look, I have just seen King Hussein entering this marquee. The idea of an Arab head of state coming to pay his respects at the death of an Israeli prime minister. Now, I tell these two true stories because they symbolize another part of this huge drama, the human element, the human dimension, and how both for ordinary people and for important people, these human factors are hugely relevant. We can get very depressed, very upset, very pessimistic about Israel and the Palestinians and the overall relationship. I heard how an Israeli and a Palestinian went to see God. And when they were in the presence of the Almighty, they said, we are an Israeli and a Palestinian. We've come to ask you, will there ever be peace and friendship between our two peoples? And apparently God replied, yes, of course there will. I've no doubt about it, but it won't be in my time. A rather depressing thought when you think about it, but inevitably an element of truth. Let me just, for a few moments, if I may, not speak about Israel and the Palestinians, but speak about one or two of the myths about the Middle East. How often have we all heard that if only Israel and Palestine could resolve their problems, the Middle East would be an area of peace and tranquility? That's less often heard nowadays for obvious reasons. And you only have to look for a moment at some of the terrible traumas in that region to know that while Israel and the Palestinian relationship are hugely important, They are far from being either the only or the cause of the huge difficulties facing that region. The trauma in Syria can hardly be explained by Israel. Iran's interest in nuclear weapons, of course, has an Israeli dimension to it. But the people who are even more anxious and concerned than the Israelis about the possibility of an Iranian nuclear weapon are the Saudis and the Gulf states. When you think of the Shia-Sunni divide, that is an internal sectarian conflict that has realized enormous and serious proportions. When you think of jihadi terrorists, Israel, of course, may be one of their targets, but it's far from being even the main target of the 9/11 bombers or the bombers in London or in other parts of the world. So sadly, the Middle East, the Arab world, has been going through a period of extraordinary difficulties and extraordinary traumas. And Israel is, relatively speaking, of course, a beacon of stability, democracy, rule of law in an otherwise turbulent region. But let me try and anticipate what are the longer-term trends that are happening, relevant to Israel, but also relevant to Europe, because the Middle East is our backyard. The Mediterranean is our sea. What happens there is not just faraway countries of which we know little, it's our own neighbors. One of the phenomena, and it's a very disturbing phenomena, is the fragmentation of all those countries that board the Eastern Mediterranean. Because very many of those states may cease to become such. Just look at that coastline. You have what obviously used to be the Palestinian Mandate, which is not two, but three territories: Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, each with their own governments. You have Lebanon, with South Lebanon effectively run by Hezbollah, and that country far from united and disparate. You have the possibility of the collapse of Syria, the high possibility of the collapse of Syria as a state, with the Kurds in the north, the Alawites in the coastal plains, possibly one day breaking away from the rest of Syria. So that fragmentation is very dangerous, because when you get that fragmentation, you get vacuums, and vacuums are serious and terrible things. But you also have a curious evolution of new relationships. And although they will not realize themselves in the short term, we are already beginning to see curious things happening. One of which could be a rather extraordinary growth of common interest between Israel and some of its Arab neighbors. The threat from Iran, for example. Saudi objectives with regard to Iran are not that different from Israeli objectives. And that's already shown itself in a number of ways, some spoken but most unspoken, but nevertheless visible to those who study these matters. There's an old saying, my enemy's enemy is my friend. And although friendship may show itself in varying ways, it can sometimes have powerful geopolitical consequences. Of course, it could go exactly the other way around. You could get an end to the theocratic regime, the Ayatollahs in Iran one day. That's entirely possible. They have lost their legitimacy with many of their people. And if that ever disappeared, then Iran could develop the kind of relationship with Israel that it had in the days of the Shah. If you think of the history of that region, you had the Arab states hostile to Israel for many years, but you had around them other countries, including Muslim countries, like Turkey and Iran, who worked closely with Israel on a number of pragmatic issues. So there's all sorts of possible formulae, and we cannot exclude any of them developing. But I come back to the Israeli-Palestinian issue, because although it's not the cause of many of these problems, its resolution would make a huge difference from the point of view not just of Israelis and Palestinians, but for the economic and social and cultural and political potential of that region. You can't choose your geographical neighbors any more than you can choose your family. And for Israel to have a normal relationship with the Arab world ultimately does depend on Israel having a normal relationship with the Palestinians as well. So the two-state solution is often mentioned as the way forward, and I strongly, personally believe in it. I was Foreign Secretary when the United Kingdom first committed itself to supporting a two-state solution. But we have to realize what that means. First of all, those in Israel who are ambivalent about it, some openly so, some in practice disinterested or hostile, that's easy to point to all the downside and all the problems and all the difficulties. But they have to address what is the alternative. And ultimately, there are only two other possibilities. One is permanent occupation of another country, and that cannot be a long-term option for a democratic society that believes in the rule of law like Israel. The only other possibility, if it's not to be two-state, is a one-state solution. And a one-state solution, whatever its other arguments may be, can never be a Jewish state in the way that Israel is and the government of Israel wish it to continue to be and to be declared to be. So if one wants Israel to be not just recognized, but enjoy the reality of being a Jewish state, then that cannot be based on either permanent or long-term control of its immediate neighbor. But also, if there is to be a two-state solution, we must not shy away from the fact that the Palestinian element of that two-state solution must not just be a nominal state, not just something called a state. It must have a territorial integrity, and it must have an economic viability. Because without that, it will never be a stable state. It will never be able, even if it wishes to be a proper partner for Israel. So as we all know, and I'm not saying anything remarkable or new, it requires hard decisions, and hard decisions that don't involve war must involve compromise. So what is the way forward? And I simply offer just 2 points. First of all, I've often believed, and not just in relation to Israel and the Palestinians, that when you have a great international crisis, when people are looking for solutions, they usually find solutions. When people are looking for problems, they usually find problems. And I'm not entirely certain that we are not, in respect of both Israel and the Palestinians, still in that second area at this moment in time, when conditions are imposed or declared by both sides that they know cannot be delivered. But when you are looking for solutions, then it's a different mindset and can lead to different consequences. And that comes to the second point that I wanted to make. And that is that when you look around the world, when the problems of the world just occasionally are resolved, it's because you don't have politicians, you have statesmen. So when apartheid was brought to an end in South Africa, and I lived in Southern Africa for several years, it happened without war. And it happened not just because of Nelson Mandela, but because on both sides, Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, representing their different communities, didn't look to the past, they looked to the future in an inspirational and effective way. I was privileged to serve under Margaret Thatcher as a junior minister of the Foreign Office, under Geoffrey Howe when he was Foreign Secretary, but responsible for our relations with the Soviet Union in the 1980s. I was present at Chequers when Gorbachev made his historic first visit and met Mrs. Thatcher, a man with whom she could do business. So when the Cold War extraordinarily came to an end, it came to an end without bloodshed, because Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev represented the two superpowers and had learned to trust each other and to work for such a solution. Now, the Middle East has had such people. It had Anwar Sadat, quite extraordinarily, his flight to Jerusalem to address the Knesset, which no one could have anticipated in their wildest dreams. Yitzhak Rabin, who had been a great general and then became a great peacemaker. King Hussein, who I got to know quite well and who was one of the most extraordinary men I've ever met, and who constantly worked with the Israelis, not just in common interest, but with them, both openly and in other ways. So such statesmen have from time to time emerged, and it must be our hope and our prayer that they will emerge in regard to Israel and the Palestinians, hopefully in the near future. I'm not going to speak for any time longer. I will follow the wise precedent of King Henry VIII, who said to each of his 6 wives, "Don't worry, I don't intend to keep you long." But you know, I just conclude with these 2 comments. First of all, that you need to have, in the Middle East, particularly for Israel and the Palestinians, those who will not claim exclusive virtue, who will not claim a monopoly of what is right. I remember a Scottish fundamentalist preacher from a very strong fundamentalist Christian sect in the Highlands of Scotland, and he was required to preside over an ecumenical service, which he thoroughly disapproved of. And on the day he climbed into the pulpit and he looked the front row of pews, and sitting there was an Anglican and a Methodist and a Baptist and a Roman Catholic and a Unitarian and various other denominations. And he began his sermon by saying, "Gentlemen, we are all here to serve the Lord. You in your ways, and I in his." And he wasn't joking. And that sort of exclusive belief in having a sanctitude, monopoly of verity is something which is poisonous. We know this is Israel's anniversary of its independence, its 66th anniversary. Anniversaries are important. When Winston Churchill was 80 years of age, a young man was sent to take his photograph. And having taken it, he said to Churchill, "Sir Winston, this has been a great honor for me to take your official photograph on your 80th anniversary. I hope you don't mind me saying that I hope I have the privilege of taking your photograph on your 90th anniversary, your 100th anniversary." And Churchill apparently looked at him and said, "Don't see why not. You look reasonably healthy to me." Well, the UJIA looks very healthy to me. Israel looks healthy to me. It's a good time to be able to address you. We now have some time for question and answer. I know it's not very long, but let's try and have some exchange in the minutes that are available. Thank you very much indeed. Let me invite questions. I think there are microphones going around. I can't, because of the lights on me, I can't see you too clearly. So, anyone wish to? Yes, right, sir, on my right. I think there's a microphone coming.
Thank you, Sir Malcolm. That was an excellent presentation. Can you envisage a time when the state of Israel should negotiate with Hamas?
Well, you know, we had a comparable problem with the IRA when the question, they had been terrorists, they were carrying out terrorism, and we would not have any formal relationship with them. The way in which that changed, it might be a precedent, I don't know, but the way that changed is, first of all, they stopped blowing up people and killing people. Secondly, they had to make a political and public political statement that the days of terrorist violence were behind them and that they were looking for a political solution. And many didn't believe them at first. It had to be it took several years to get from the stage of no contact, or certainly no official contact, to a formal negotiation. But it happened. So it may happen with Hamas. I hope it does happen with Hamas. It's in everyone's interest that it should, but we're not there yet. Next question. Yes, sir? There's a microphone coming.
Sir Malcolm, do you think there is any prospect of Israel making peace with an Arab state before making peace with the Palestinians?
It already has done. It has had peace with Egypt. It's had peace with Jordan for many years.
Apart from those two states?
Well, the tragedy is that at the time of Rabin's assassination, it was already happening. There was an Israeli office, if I'm not mistaken, in one of the Gulf states. Morocco had invited Israelis informally to be present. Gradually, many of the moderate Arab states were wanting to have an Israeli diplomatic presence and be willing to do so. I spoke he said it publicly, so I can refer to this conversation. I spoke to Prince Turki of Saudi Arabia just a couple of years ago. And if you know, the Saudi initiative is that all the Arabs would recognize Israel if they do a deal with the Palestinians. And I said to him, what does doing a deal mean? Do you mean you would actually have Israeli ambassador in Riyadh and a Saudi ambassador in Israel? And he said yes. Now, he's not the Saudi government, but a very senior member of the Saudi royal family with a long history of involvement in these matters. So I think there is a determination. It goes back to the point I made earlier. For most of the Arab world, if the Palestinians can accept a deal, they can. And they know that Israel could be a crucial force for economic development and stability in a region which is consumed with such turmoil. So.
Thank you, Sir Malcolm. With respect, isn't the problem more deeper? I mean, you compared it with the IRA. I mean, the IRA don't teach their children, never did, in the educational books to blow up every single English person.
Sure. Of course, there is no exact parallel, but I'm sorry, in terms of the fundamentals, the issue is comparable. The IRA had to give up the equivalent to the right of return. The whole point of the IRA was to force the reunification of Ireland by terrorist means. And it was only when they realized that wasn't going to happen that what were then middle-aged terrorists didn't want to end up as old terrorists and chose a political route. So yes, there are many differences, and the point you make is an entirely valid point, but it doesn't change the substance. Israel can't expect, or Israel shouldn't want to wait till every Arab loves Israel. Why should Arabs love Israel any more than Israelis love the Arab world? We didn't love the Soviet Union when we ended the Cold War. So it's not a question of loving, approving, having empathy. It is recognizing common interests that you either resolve by fighting each other or by diplomatic means. And if you opt for the diplomatic route, there has to be compromise. It's crucial. And compromise means you don't get everything you ideally would like. But the alternative is fighting people, and that doesn't give you everything you want either. No. That's it.
So Malcolm, just hold on 1 second. Just on behalf of us all, thank you very much for a most informative and interesting speech this morning. President on behalf of the UJIA,
thank you very much.
This may be one of the programs. Thank you very much. Thank you. So once again, please just remain seated for a couple of minutes while we draw the raffle. Thank you all for attending. Thank you once again to Deutsche Bank for their sponsorship, to the CST, and to the staff of UJIA, particularly Nick Schlugman for putting on a great breakfast this morning. Zach is going to arrange the drawing of the raffle.
Boker Tov, Chag Sameach. For the lucky winners, you can collect your prizes at the reception desk. And I do urge you to stay for the Hatikva after I announce who are the winners. First prize is number 5274. 5274. Second prize, number 2856. 2856. Third prize is number 1345. 1345. Fourth is 1169. 1169. Fifth is 1349, 1349. Sixth is 1204, 1204. And the last one is 2439. How many? 9? Okay, two more. 5169, 5169. And the last one is 3855. Thank you very much. Please join us for the Hatikva.
Far
you very much. In this, we concluded the Yom Ha'atzmaut Business Breakfast. Thank you.